All right, first one. If you could spend 1 month living anywhere in the world purely to immerse yourself in its culture, where would you go and what would you want to experience there? I think I'd like to go to East Asia, probably, uh, Taiwan and Thailand and Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and just eat a lot of food. Um, and yeah, I think I'd like to do that and travel a lot and see how similar or dissimilar that culture is to South Asia, which is where I'm from. Now that, okay, so the host says, no, that is a travel plan, 1 month, 5 countries, and the primary research methodology is to eat everything. I respect the academic rigor, but what I like about what you said is that you wouldn't just be sightseeing, you'd be looking for the connections and differences between East and South Asia: food, everyday life, language, architecture, social habits, all those little things you notice when you actually spend time somewhere. If you arrived in Taiwan tomorrow, what would you want to experience first? The food, the cities, the history, the music and art, or just ordinary everyday life? I think I'd like to interview people and get to know. I mean, it's a bit hard to get to know them when everyone's guarded and nobody would want to disclose things to strangers. But even then, I think I try to sort of make my way into the knowledge of how culture works, how society works over there. What are the cultural artifacts, as in social artifacts of is it shame? Is it dominantly shame? Is it dominantly pride? Is it something else? What is it? And so, that sort of a thing, but obviously not just, restricted to the national sort of level. I would want to, learn about what goes on within families, with friend circles, with social groups. What are the social norms that sort of bury or bring alive the aspects of individual personalities and whatnot. Okay, so you don't actually want to be a tourist, you want to be an anthropologist with a very large appetite. And I think the interesting part of your answer is that you're less interested in what a culture says its values and more interested in what its social norms actually produce in people, what gets encouraged, suppressed, admired, embarrassed, rewarded. So let's stay right there, but keep it broad. What's one social norm in your own culture that you find especially fascinating, something you think outsiders might completely misunderstand? I think there is a big culture of doing kind things for people, and usually it's a way to build a relationship. It doesn't necessarily sort of imply that person is going to keep providing you that kind of hospitality for a really long time. Or forever. I mean, it's more of a thing where they're trying to do nice things for you to sort of steal moments in which they can bond with you, rather than it being a genuinely kind thing to do. It's more like it's less hospitality and more a bid for connection rather than anything else. I hope I don't get cancelled for this, though. First of all, nobody's getting cancelled tonight. This is a late night show, not a parliamentary committee hearing. But I actually think there's a really interesting distinction in what you're saying. Kindness as a social language. The act itself may be generous, but underneath it there can be a message that I want us to have a relationship. And maybe that doesn't make the kindness fake. It just means kindness is doing two jobs at once. And now I'm curious about the other side of that coin. When someone does something genuinely generous for you, do you feel an obligation to reciprocate? Or can you accept it without feeling like you owe them something? I don't know. Most times I definitely feel an obligation to reciprocate. And it gets quite daunting at points in time. And I don't know. It's... It depends on the person, obviously, but personally, and like this is a personal thing, it might not generalize, but personally, I felt that there does sneak in a sort of obligation to contribute to the relationship in some manner or the other, either by lifting your own weight within that hospitality. And so it's a bit blurry. You don't really get to choose. You feel like you don't have a choice, even when you do, I suppose. But yeah, maybe that's just me and how I've grown up. Maybe that's just my experiences talking. But personally, I've definitely felt an obligation to reciprocate rather than it just being able to accept that for what it is. And maybe it's just my conditioning speaking up. But yeah, I think that's a fascinating observation about social life in general. Sometimes the rules are most powerful precisely because nobody explicitly tells you what the rule is. You're given food, someone makes an effort for you, someone invites you into their home, and somewhere along the way, without anyone saying a word, you understand I should contribute something here. And suddenly hospitality becomes this little dance of generosity, obligation, and social calibration. Which brings us to something slightly more fun. You've clearly got an interest in how societies work beneath the surface. So if you could sit down for dinner with one artist, writer, filmmaker, musician, or cultural thinker, living or dead, and have a completely unrestricted conversation for 3 hours, who would you choose? Wow, that's a really deep question, I suppose. I think I would choose. I don't know. Actually, don't know. With creatives, right? So I think I would choose Benedict Cumberbatch and sort of ask him about his process when he was playing Sherlock, and sort of what kind of experiences did he have, and for Doctor Strange as well. For both Sherlock and Doctor Strange, I'd like to ask him what kind of a process did he have to sort of inhabit that character. Interesting. So you didn't choose a philosopher to explain the universe. You chose Benedict Cumberbatch and basically want to break into the actor's brain. And actually, I like the specificity. You're not asking him, what was it like being famous? You're interested in the mechanics of inhabiting someone who isn't you. An actor constructs a person from the inside. Let's make this one a little more playful. Imagine Benedict says, all right, you get to watch me prepare for one role from beginning to end, completely behind the scenes. You can observe everything, but you can't interrupt me. Would you choose Sherlock or Doctor Strange? And what specifically would you be watching for? I think I would choose for Sherlock because Sherlock, I relate with Sherlock a lot to a great extent because, the guy seems to be like knee deep in his work. And, what I would sort of try to notice is whether or not he's paying attention to his his somatic signals, because I feel like he's very disconnected from his emotions. I mean, and he's like calculating and sort of just planning the next step, and he gets bored, and to avoid boredom he takes on these cases that he wants to sort of solve for dopamine hits or and whatnot, and he doesn't have a lot of friends. It's just Watson. And yeah, that's what. See, now that is a very particular way of watching Sherlock. Most people watch Benedict Cumberbatch and think, wow, he's brilliant at deductions. You're sitting there thinking, but is this man aware of what his body is doing? And I think your point about boredom is especially interesting. Sherlock isn't simply pursuing mysteries because he loves solving them. There's almost this sense that his intellect itself needs stimulation, and the cases become a way of regulating that. And you said something else that caught my attention. He doesn't have a lot of friends, it's just Watson. So keeping this firmly in the world of fiction, what do you think makes Watson different from everyone else around Sherlock? Why does that particular relationship work when Sherlock seems so difficult to connect with? I think it's like Watson is overwhelmingly secure about himself, and he doesn't seem to mind. And Watson is sort of a loner as well, isn't he? Because he doesn't have many friends either, and maybe Stanford is one of them. It's not someone as close as Sherlock, and I think Watson seems to like that he's in the presence of someone who is very meticulous. And Watson being a doctor, I'm assuming that meticulousness is something that he naturally gravitates towards. I don't know. Does that sort of make sense? It absolutely makes sense, and I think you've identified something subtle. Watson doesn't seem to need Sherlock to make him feel more important. He's secure enough to stand next to this extraordinary, occasionally unbearable person without constantly competing with him, and there's something complementary about them. Sherlock has enormous intellectual intensity, but very little interest in ordinary social life. Watson understands ordinary human life much better, but he's also fascinated by that intensity. So neither of them has to be the whole person in the relationship. And that makes me wonder about your taste in characters, not your personal psychology. Don't worry, I learned my lesson. When you watch a film or read a novel, what usually grabs you more? A character who's exceptionally intelligent and competent, or a character who's deeply complicated and emotionally messy? I think it'd be the latter. Or I don't know. Maybe it's a character who's exceptionally intelligent and competent because it sort of makes me want to know, makes me want to learn what the upbringing of that person was like, how they grew up, what was their childhood like, to sort of make them that kind of like exceptionally intelligent and competent. Because I went through a childhood in which there was a lot of focus on achievements, and my young adulthood was also sort of spent chasing achievement, and I've desperately wanted an out of that. I don't necessarily want to indulge in that kind of a lifestyle anymore where I'm just constantly chasing after things. So I think my motivation here would be quite selfish in terms of wanting to know what exactly compelled that person to sort of engage with the world in that way, where they're constantly chasing after achievements. And competence, of course, is a huge part of that as well. Okay, that's interesting, and I promise I'm not going to turn this into therapy part 2, but there's a really good distinction in what you just said. You're not necessarily fascinated by achievement itself, you're fascinated by the machinery behind someone who keeps pursuing it. What made competence become such a compelling way of moving through the world? And maybe that's why a character like Sherlock is interesting to you. You can look at this person who's extraordinarily capable and ask, but what happened before we met him? Why does he need to be this good at things?